It is in Michigan. It is cold.
It's past my bedtime.
I mean, it's still bright outside. But yeah, it's past your bedtime. But welcome. I am Tazeen. I'm your host, and you're watching Digging Deeper. And I'm excited because today's episode is called Merging Selves.
Oh.
Politics.
Oh, you're doing fingers.
Poetry and identity.
Yep.
Right?
Poetry, politics, and identity.
Poetry, politics, and identity. So with me, I have Dr. Reem Abou-Samra. I always make it a point to say Dr. Reem, who is a really great friend of mine. We have known each other for well over a decade, I think, at this point.
Yeah, it's almost 11 years now.
Yeah, so I'm really excited to have you here.
Hello.
Oh, cool. AJ's on. So, and that's one of my students. So, yeah, could you start off by telling us a little bit about who you are and then what's your expression?
Yeah, I thought about that question a lot, and I still don't know how to answer it. Like, any event I talk at, anywhere I go, and they ask for, like, introduce yourself, I never know really how to introduce myself.
It's always awkward.
Yeah, you're like, oh, how am I supposed to, like, do that? So, I'm Reem. That's basically how I always introduce myself. As Tazeen said, I have a doctoral degree in political science. I guess that matters to some extent.
It does. I mean, that's a huge accomplishment.
Yeah, and I'm a poet. And right now, most of the time, I do mommy stuff, so I'm a parent.
And how many kids do you have?
I have 2 kids, so one of which is sitting on the other
right
side
there.
of the room. Hopefully she doesn't start crying.
So if you hear her, she's there. She's going to be part of the episode.
She's 3 months
Hi,
today.
Farah. Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
That's today. Crazy.
Yeah.
And how did you get into your expression?
So
you write poetry.
Yeah, so I do spoken word poetry, and I started writing as a little kid. I come from 3 generations of poets. My father is a poet, and his brother is a poet as well, and my grandfather is a poet. My grandfather only went to school for up to 6th grade, but he wrote like, with Arabic poetry comes in like rhythmic pentameters and stuff like that, and he would write like these complicated poems despite the fact that he was like uneducated to some extent, and so I fell in love with that, and the person who actually made me or kind of like, she didn't make me, but like intrigued me enough to write poetry was my sister Bois, because she would write this really emo poetry when she was like...
Didn't we all go through that though?
Yeah, well, I didn't really go through emo poetry.
I definitely did.
So she'd write this really emo poetry, and then I decided to start writing, and that was like in 2nd or 3rd grade for me. Yeah. And then I organized all the open mics and poetry events at my school all the way through high school. I continued doing it after I graduated for the school, and then I moved to Michigan and started going to spoken word events. Leslie took me to that, so that was kind of cool. Shout out to Leslie. That was my first like scene here in Detroit. Yeah.
And you were quite active in it for a long time.
Yeah. I would go to like an open mic like 3 times a week.
Wow.
So heavily involved in that scene. But then suddenly, I stopped pretty much after I had my first kid. Like, it just didn't happen as much. So that's basically who I am. I was thinking about a lot of it because the way I think of my life historically, a lot of it has to do with, like, I think of myself, like, I reminisce about my life like a 70-year-old man. So, like, as though I think about certain points of my life as though I'm not a young person, as though it was something that's completely far away from me now. So when I was thinking about how to introduce myself, I realized that's how I think about the different stages of my life. Like, I was thinking of my grandfather, the way he talks, or he used to talk before he passed away. And, yeah.
Do you feel like his poetry and his style of writing affected you and your style of writing?
So I didn't really get to read much of his work. Yeah, so I came across a few poems here and there in their like 1-bedroom house. But no, I don't know it that much. The person who, like, my other grandfather, my maternal grandfather, is the one who like really influenced me in terms of activism and politics. And he's the one who kind of like used to talk about himself all the time in his life. in terms of like stories.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, the reason I was thinking about that was like I talk about my life in Massachusetts as though it was like a long time ago.
Yeah.
I talk about like my teenage years like as though there's someone's like 40 to 60 years old or something. So it's just like really funny to me.
That's interesting. But I mean, I think it makes sense though, because you are looking back at those stages.
Yeah. That, and I was really active from a really young age. So like, I mean, all throughout my history in life, my parents used to take us to protests and stuff like that from a very young age. And then it's also like a Boston culture to have like a protest every other day.
Yeah.
And then
yeah, Noni and I, when we were in Boston, there was a protest that we randomly joined.
In downtown Crossing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then what happened was, because I started high school when I was 12, like I started doing things that like, you know, older people do at a really young age. And then because I started college at 14, I was doing things that people do in their like late 20s and stuff. So I think of those things and like there are phases in my life. Like I was extremely active. I was part of like the Stop the Wars Coalition, part of like Corey reporting issues and like, you know, protesting against that, like criminalization of African American reports and stuff like that. So like I was part of these huge movements at a really young age. So when I came to Michigan, like all of that suddenly stopped because I wasn't involved in the same way or in the same capacity. So I think of it as like a historical moment.
I see.
Yeah.
Is a lot of your poetry, I mean, I've heard a lot of your poetry, obviously, over years, and much of it is very political. I mean, you have stories and things that are very personal and things that are very political as well. So is that something that was affected by your activism, or your activism sort of affected that?
It's a mixture. So just like the title of the thing is called Emerging Selves, all of these elements have always been part of one major whole that I am. So like one being that I am. I've never really had like this phase and that's like side of me. They're all like one in the whole. So like my activism can be spiritual, my poetry can be political, my like politics can be like religious. So all of these things are heavily intertwined for me, and they're like a merged self.
Which I think is important, because I think well, that was one of the first things you want to talk about is scattered sense of self. And I think especially young people who have different parts of their identity and don't know how to put it together, that can be a big struggle.
I had like a specific quote I wanted to read, because like this is why the word merging selves came, like it's not something like that came, like I knew about it a long time ago, but I never really put it into words. But this is like a really famous book from a really famous author. Obviously you're probably gonna know who I'm gonna say. Like I'm talking about W.E.B. Du Bois. Like so and like there's this quote in his book The Souls of Black Folk, and the quote is pretty long, so I'm just gonna read it though. It is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, the sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of the world that looks on in an amused contempt and pity. One ever feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body, whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. The history of the American Negro is the battle of this strife, this longing to attain self-conscious manhood, to merge his double self into a better and truer self. In this merging, he wishes neither of the older selves to be lost. He does not wish to Africanize America, for America has too much to teach the world in Africa. He wouldn't bleach his Negro blood in the flood of white Americanism, for he knows that the Negro blood has a message for the world. He simply wishes to make it possible for a man to be both a Negro and an American without being cursed upon and spit upon by his fellows, without having the doors of opportunity closed roughly in his face. So this is like a famous quote, but like this is why I love Du Bois, like straight up, like I'm obsessed with him. But the reason why is because you have the spiritual, the political, and identity all merged into that. And like when he talks about like spiritual striving, he's talking about like the betterment of oneself by accepting those different components of them. And because people are forced to be fragmented in this society because of hyphenated identities and things like that. And I wouldn't claim that I could ever say that, like, you know, I know what the Black experience is. Like, I don't. But I do understand hyphenated identity. And I do understand that feeling of fragmentation, that feeling of feeling scattered, and like finding a way to merge those parts of yourself together. Yeah.
Do you feel like poetry has been instrumental in merging those parts together?
Yeah, I think so. For me, a lot of my poetry sounds like a moment of self-discovery. And it's not that I suddenly discover myself, but I feel like that feeling comes up over and over again. That feeling of like, because people are so determined to make me feel fragmented, or the world is so determined to make me feel fragmented, that I constantly have to reaffirm my unification, or the unity or the merged form of myself. And so it's not about like people, like I'm paranoid and people are trying to do this to me, but this is like the systematic issue we face here in America.
I mean, fragmentation is an issue that all minorities face. Look at, he's downstairs. It's an issue that all minorities face, and the Black experience is the most like quintessential example of that, I would say. To be in a place and to be otherized. I mean, Bois talks so much about being otherized.
Yeah, that's the whole concept of double consciousness, that like you're constantly thinking about how the other person perceives you.
Yeah.
And like the best like Muslim example, I mean, considering that Muslims are like all across the spectrum ethnically and racially, but the best Muslim like example of that is like a huge event happens, like some sort of bombing or something, and the first thought they have is, oh, I hope it wasn't a Muslim, right? And that's like that's the experience of double consciousness on the spot, of seeing yourself through someone else's eyes. I'm so worried about how the media is going to spin this. Yeah.
And that it's so subconscious. I feel like I think that way so frequently without realizing that I'm thinking that way.
Because it's like ingrained into our minds, like, and it's not like something that you want to be ingrained into your mind. That's why, like, you know, the whole movement, like teach yourself that you're beautiful. Like if you're black, that black is beautiful. It's because you have to reprogram your brain because it was forced to see the world in that way. And so we're forced to see like Muslim Americans in general across the board are forced to see themselves as like, you know, terrorists or whatever. So they constantly are thinking in that terms. And like I was talking to someone, I don't know if it was you or someone, but like how anytime I see a clock and someone asks me the time and it's 9:11, I say 9:12. Like I never say 9:11. I'll say 9:10 or I say 9:12. I don't say 9:11 because of like, you know, like this communal guilt that is forced upon us.
Yeah, that's so true. I had a thought that just slipped my mind. It just escaped me. But let me take this comment. So Christina is on. For me, once I learned about the civil rights movement, I felt a responsibility to my ancestors to be an activist for justice for all minorities. What experience was it for you? Tracy said powerful. And why? We'll take that right after you answer this.
That's such a great question. I think for me, activism was kind of like put into my bones or like in my blood. So I don't think I had an aha moment that was like, let me be an activist or let me like fight for the rights of, you know, all of humanity. And it might be because like I come from a family that is like activist or community organizing oriented. And so it just like something like the way you're raised with, or that idea that you're something that you're raised with. And so like I'm passionate about it. For me, the reason why it's so important for me is because I experience what it's like for me not to be an activist, and it totally destroyed my soul. Like, and you saw me during that phase. And like, so I recently, like during graduate school, the last couple of years of graduate school, I kind of was like focusing on that. And then I got married and I was focusing on that. And then I was just like, wow, like I'm in this black hole of nothingness. Like what am I doing with my life? And so I actually decided to commit myself to activism again. And this was a decision I made in like the last couple of weeks. So I think my depression is actually what got me to decide to get back into activism. Yeah.
That's deep. I mean, that being activism has the word active in it. Yeah. And to be active is to be alive. Yeah. That's how I think of it. She has one more question. Why do you feel a responsibility to empathize with struggles of people beyond your circle and your ethnicity? Because a lot of people nowadays have a hard time stepping out of their comfort zone.
You know, I think for me, it's because I don't really see myself as a part of a certain group, or I didn't see myself as a part of a certain group until I got a lot older. And that was because a group was ascribed to me, not necessarily because it was something that I chose for myself. So I think that the struggles of other groups or other minority groups, I always felt like, you know, like we're like, you know, brothers in humanity or whatever term you want to use. But I also didn't grow up in my community. So like the people I grew up with most, like that I was raised around were either African American or South Asian. So for me, like those were what I identified with, not like as a personal like, oh, I'm South Asian or I'm African American, like I can't adopt someone else's identity, but it was like a culture that I was exposed to more than my own culture. And I think that probably has a role to play with it, that I was exposed to these other cultures during moments of my upbringing. And so it makes it very easy for me to empathize because I feel like I'm one with this community or something of that nature.
I think that makes sense too, because if you're not exposing yourself to other communities, or if your community is a homogenous community and it's not diverse, then I think what ends up happening is people focus only on that one specific homogenous community.
But it's also helpful, like, in the sense of, like, like, if you organize within your own community, you may be much more effective than organizing in another community. As long as you build bridges and you, like, get involved. So, like, I was organizing in Massachusetts for the Muslim community at large. I was organizing, I don't think the organization exists anymore, but Mass Freedom Foundation. At the time, I was, like, their outreach, like, person or something like that. And I was organizing on behalf of, quote unquote, the Muslim community, not just like, you know, because people assume that Mass is just Arabs. But so when I was doing that, I was building relationships with other communities, and I was, what is the coalition building? That's the word. I was trying to remember the word. Like I was building coalitions with people from other organizations. That's why I got like involved in Corey reporting issues or criminal record like abuses and things like that. That's why I got involved with other like immigration issues and stuff like that, because they're issues that affect all of the Muslim community, not just like Arabs. So my activism was never within my like community in terms of Arab community. It was always involved in the Muslim community at large. So because that it's naturally diverse for me, it just, you know, plays off like that.
That makes sense. Good questions. You also talked about one of the things from merged self, from your scattered sense of self and fragmented sense of self.
I know those words are awesome.
Is that from that you have to find something that's going, if you have fragmentation, right, and if you're a minority in this country, the assumption is that you are fragmented, or parts of you may feel fragmented. So what is that sort of bridge from fragmentation to unity? Because you talk about poetry and academia being sort of like this vehicle of selfhood.
So there's this concept, what is it? So concentric identity is a concept. It was in this book about patriotism and cosmopolitanism, like in the 90s, but the author, I think it was Kwame Appiah, and he talked about concentric identity, that you do not have to give up one identity for the other. And the problem in America is that we are forced to give up one of those identities. You have to be fully American, or you have, and you can't be that with a hyphenated identity. So the thing that helped me was like this idea of concentric identity, which is like you can have multiple layers, and this is like I talk about this in my research all the time, right? You can have multiple layers of identity, and just because one is standing in the forefront at that moment doesn't mean it negates all the other ones. So like I can come, like, you know, I live in this community which is predominantly at our mosque, South Asian, right? So I can come to that community, you know, speak some of the language, interact culturally, right? I'm not giving up my Arabness at that moment, but it's a part of how I was raised. So for me, I'm not giving up the fact that I was raised, like, you know, in a South Asian and African American community. I just am, like, you know, embracing that part of my identity. It's on the forefront. The rest of my identity is, like, you know, packed away in my closet, and then as different situations arise, you kind of navigate between all of them. And I think that's the problem people have, that they have to be one or the other rather than understanding that you can be multiple layers. You can be, you know, what is it, the ogres from, like, what is that movie? Shrek, yeah, Shrek. His name was Shrek, I forgot. Right, you peel back the layers of the onion, right? But yeah, like, you have multiple layers to you. You don't have to be that top layer all the time.
Or whatever that top layer is can be different.
Yeah.
Depending on where you are
and who you're interacting with. And it's not about being fake. Because some people feel like, oh, then they're being fake. They're putting one image out. But you're not being fake. You're being yourself in this different scenario, this different set of rules, with this different set of interactions. But who you are and what your principles are still true. And that's how, like, I remember when I first moved here to Michigan, everyone was like, Reem, how are you so real? You're the same everywhere you go. And I'm like, really? Because I think of myself with multiple identities and I'm comfortable with that. But, like, it's because I have a set of principles that are unshakable, and those principles will stay the same until the day I die. Those are my principles. That's who I am. It doesn't matter what, like, you know, tapestry I'm wearing at that moment.
I think that can be difficult, though, sometimes when you feel like, for instance, I have my personality of when I'm Professor Ayub, like the way that you speak, the way that you deal with people when you're at work, right? Which is different than when I'm like Tazeen, a host at an open mic, which is different when I'm just Tazeen.
Peace and love.
You know, Tazeen at home. Because I also think that maybe then that parts of your identity also has to do with language. Because the language and the type of speech that is used in different spaces differs depending on the purpose of that space.
Yeah, I think so. I think that makes sense. Because you have to speak the language of the people you're interacting with. If you speak in another language, it deconstructs all the rules of engagement. So, like, if you're speaking to your students super casually, right, then you lose that relationship of professor and students, and then they, like, annoy the heck out of you, and they're like, change my grade. No, I can't change your grade. I'm sorry, I'm your professor.
I'm just a mathematician. You're the one who
right. And then, like, if you're gonna sit and lecture us at an open mic, like, you're gonna lose your audience. You know, like, so each space, it does have its own set of language rules. Because if you speak the same way all the time, then the rules of relationships change, and those rules of relationships sometimes are important. Like, I talk to my daughter sometimes as a friend, and sometimes I talk to her as, like, listen, you're gonna get in trouble now. Like, you know, so those rules of engagement are different. And then, like, your friends are different too. Like, the way you interact with your friends are totally different. Even now, like, I'm talking to you in a way that I don't normally talk to you because all these other people are watching.
Just slightly, you know, a little bit more formal, but they're all family. It's just family watching it. How has poetry and your political activism and engagement affected the sense of selfhood?
I think for me, my activism a lot of the time has been through poetry, because up until, like, maybe the last 3 years, I was pretty much the only hijabi at open mics. And so when I talked about issues, I was like, I have to make it worth it. Like, I have to get my message across. So a lot of times my poetry and my activism were kind of intertwined into one another. I can't remember the rest of the question.
Well, how is it a vehicle of, like, sort of you coming into self-oneness or unity?
Oh, selfhood. I think any type of expression really, like, makes you feel, like, whole in a way. And if you negate that part of you, or, like, neglect that part of you, then, like, you will feel fragmented. You'll feel like, I can't fulfill this purpose inside of me, or and that could be through spiritual expression, that could be through activism, that could be through poetry and, like, music and things like that. But I feel like people who kind of, even, like, the most logical and mathematical people, I think they have a form of expression that maybe someone who's more artistic doesn't really understand. And they navigate those forms of expression, right? Like, and for some people it's video gaming, but, like, for me it's poetry.
There's a friend of ours who is, like, really into video gaming, but, like, the type of video games that are very artistic and have stories, and you see a story unfolding. And so that in and of itself is also an expression, because you're storytelling through that game.
you're building an identity through that game.
Yeah.
Which I don't think is like a false sense of identity. I think it's a sense of expression. Like the who I am in my poem at that moment is who I am in my poem at that moment.
Yeah.
And during that game, that's who you are in that moment too.
Yeah.
So I think that when you like do your form of expression or like express yourself, I guess, right? You naturally are like giving a piece of yourself to the world. You're giving yourself to the world to, even if it's personal and you don't perform, like if you're not performing on a stage and you're just writing poetry for yourself in a journal, when you open that journal and read those poems, you're giving yourself to those pages. And like I think that's really important. It really gives you a sense of selfhood when you're writing those things down or you're expressing yourself and you reflect back to it, because human consciousness comes from self-reflection. So
power of reflection.
Yeah.
And that when you're reading those pages back, you are seeing yourself.
Yeah.
So it's literally a reflection.
And the changes that you have over time.
Yeah.
And things like that.
That's so true. I mean, when I go back and look at readings that I've had, like, from the past, like, you see what stage you were in life. You see how you were feeling. You see what your thought process was in that stage, right? And you're able to see what moments in your life and what experiences developed and grew you. Yeah. Where you changed that.
Yeah, because definitely when I first started writing poetry, I was a lot more like exclusively political, and it was kind of separate from whom I was, like who I was at that moment. So like for me, when I look back at that poems, it's like there's no life in this. Like it seems so separate from me and distinct or whatever. Yeah. And then like over time, I got a lot more personal in my poetry, and that's because I became so into like politics of identity.
Yeah.
So.
What got you into politics of identity? Because you've done a lot of research in that.
W.E.B. Du Bois.
Basically.
I fell in love.
I mean, he was expressing himself in his writings, right?
Yeah.
That's a piece of him that he's giving to the world, or that he gave to the world.
Like side note, his writings are so good, because this is like exactly what I'm talking about, like this merging of political identity and like selfhood. Like, if you read our The Souls of Black Folk, that's exactly what it is. Yeah. He's talking about the political, he's talking about the self. He's discovering himself when he's writing this, because his experience, maybe this is why I'm obsessed with him, but his experience, like, he didn't realize, like, really what it was to be African American until after he left Massachusetts. And, like, went to, like, Philadelphia, and did, like, some research there, and he realized, whoa, like being black in the South is totally different than being like black in the East Coast or up north or whatever. And he suddenly realized like how people were like perceiving them as like as a group, as opposed to like this individual and things like that. And so for me, a lot of that came to when I moved to Michigan. Yeah, I was just so I realized, I was like, oh my God, I'm Arab. I had no idea, right? Like I knew I was Arab, I knew I was Syrian, but like my primary identity, my whole life was being Muslim. Yeah. Like that's really who I was. So that's the idea that my parents like kind of instilled in us, because we were from a very diverse community. And so they didn't really care about the ethnic aspect of it. They really cared about whether or not we saw ourselves as Muslim and American. So like if you're Muslim and you're American, that's fine. Like see yourselves in those light. And I think they were worried about us having a fragmented sense of selfhood if we relied too heavily on our like Syrianness or Arabness or things like that. They didn't want us to feel like we were immigrants or something like that. They never really talked to us about it either. Yeah. So I've never had this conversation with my parents, and like it's just my parents have always had this like raising through omission type of thing. Like you guys kind of raise yourself, and like you guys like they wouldn't tell us important information and things like that.
So you kind of figure it out.
So we kind of figure it out on our own. And so when we figure it out on our own, we kind of have the sense of selfhood and independence. along the way. So I don't see it like the fact that my parents didn't force feed like Syrianness down our throat. I don't see it as like a critique. Some people are like, oh, your parents were whitewashing you. No, my parents didn't try to whitewash me. Like, and I know that. Like, they weren't trying to make us white, okay?
Yeah.
But they were trying for us to get like a sense of independence of who we are.
So when you came to Michigan, was it that people were ascribing that onto you?
Oh yeah, so I'd be like in grad school and people would be like, I know Arabs, I live in Dearborn, I know exactly what they do, la 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 la, and I'd be like, okay, sure. Like, and not only that, like even within the Muslim community, so I'd be like, I remember there was a day I was filling up gas at this gas station and like I guess the owner is like someone from the Canton community.
Yeah.
And he was just like, it was like around the Eid time, and he was just like, your people, they prayed the wrong day, la la la. And I look at him and I'm like, my people is this mosque right here. Like, this is the mosque I pray at. So, but he was talking about because there was like mosques in Dearborn that prayed a different day and things like that. So I was just like, whatever.
So people had all these assumptions.
People had these assumptions, and these assumptions weren't things that I kind of experienced before. I did to some extent, but like not in the same way.
So do you see yourself more now with that identity of being Arab and being Syrian? Or maybe, let me word it differently, more accepting of that part of your identity after having to deal with these interactions?
I think so, yeah. I think from before, I just didn't realize that I was. Because it was a part of me already, but it wasn't something that people really sat and pointed out to me. Like, they were like, oh, you're Arab, oh, you're Syrian, or whatever. But when I moved here, like, one of the things, like, someone said to me, a good friend of mine, I won't say who their name is, but they were like, you're not Syrian. Like, the first thing they said to me was, you're not Syrian. And I was just like, okay, I don't even know what that means, right? Because I didn't grow up with a Syrian community. But like, they're like, because you don't act like the Syrians that live in Michigan do, and you don't dress like the way the Syrians in Michigan do, and things like that. So I think for me, I've always been so comfortable with these multiple parts of my identity that I didn't need to talk about it. I think that's what it was. When I moved here and people started like really like trying to poke it out of me, then I started to like realize that like these are separate parts, but they're still a part of a whole for me. So like they forced those separations to come out. Like from before, I was like one big ball of gum, right? And then I realized, oh, that gum came from multiple pieces, right? And then those pieces were still fit together from before. I just saw those like, you know, lines in between of where each chewed up piece was.
What an example.
So yeah.
Christina said, ha, that's so real. The your people and know what your people are all about kind of comment or behaviors can really shake a person and force them to check their sense of self, which can be good and bad too.
I agree. I definitely agree that it can be both good and bad. Like, you can lose yourself. Like, I've seen people who kind of like were confident of who they are and completely destabilize and get completely fragmented into 1,000 pieces and not reclaim themselves again. I don't see it bad as being like getting fragmented for some time. I think it's problematic if it's forever. So like, you can be fragmented for some time. And like, that's the beauty of mosaics. Like, the most beautiful art form or some of the most beautiful art pieces are mosaics, and they're pieces of shattered glass put together. And when you put those pieces back together, it's even more beautiful than when it originally was. From before, it was just like a plain piece of glass, right? So like, I think that's it. Like that, I know, better than the gum analogy.
That's much better than the gum analogy. So much better.
But yeah, so I've seen people get shattered like that, and they still haven't been able to pick up those pieces. And complete random, but I think that analogy came to me because I read a poem from Sabrina Ali, who posted a poem about glass and shattering. So that's probably where that analogy came from in the back of my head.
That's so interesting. I mean, two things. The one, the event that we hosted, myself and Ismail and Christina and a bunch of us, was called Mosaic last year around the time of right the day after inauguration.
Oh wow!
And the reason why it was Mosaic was because it's all these different pieces coming together, and it was, you know, in solidarity of minorities. But that's so interesting, like the concept of shattering, because I've definitely written poetry, emo poetry, depressive poetry, just sad poetry about feeling like my heart has been shattered and feeling like my sense of self has been shattered and feeling like I don't know how to put the pieces back together. And it reminds me of, I don't know what it's called, but I think it's a Chinese tradition that if you have like a cracked pot, you fill it with gold, and then it becomes this really ornate, beautiful piece that was fragmented, right? It was broken or shattered, but the gold put it together, and now that it has this line, it has beautified that piece more than it originally was. Not only that,
it beautified, but it also increases its value. So, like, you become, I'm not saying that people who are, like, from before are not valuable, but your own sense of self-worth becomes even more valuable to you
with the gold,
because you saw how you were fragmented, and
now it's full,
and you really value that more than you did from before. So I think that's how I feel, because from before I didn't realize I was whole and I didn't realize I was multiple parts. Like, I didn't think about it, but after that I did start to see it that way and feel so comfortable with it.
And also with the value, I mean, if you're going with that same example, it highlights that fragmentation as something that is beautiful and something that is meaningful and something that, like, that fragmentation that you went through is a part of who you are and was a part of growing you and developing you and the person you are today. You wouldn't be that person standing there had you not gone through that experience.
It's like how people are like, embrace your stretch marks or embrace like your wrinkles and stuff like that, because it tells you the story of who you are. It's a map on your skin of where you went. That was
I know.
I did use that in a poem at one point a long time ago. I don't remember which poem.
My favorite line from your poems, which I think Christina said yes, I think it's one of Christina's favorite lines too. Because I had live streamed when you were
the braids poem? I'm gonna read that today.
Oh man. So good. But it's a story. It's like that physical story that's on you. And it's reminding you of your sense of self, of who you are. That's beautiful.
I think about that, like the concept. I never understood how important hair was to the African American community, because most of the girls when I was younger, because we were young, we didn't know about hair. So, like, you know, their hair would be in braids, and that's pretty much it. But like, there wasn't like this huge industry that you see for older women. And so when I was introduced to this, like, I was like, whoa, I had no idea how big this industry really is. But when I was younger, like, I never thought about how important that, like, aspect of culture, or how important just like styling your hair is. Because in some cultures, I don't know it so much in Syrian culture, but in some cultures, like, when you style your hair in certain ways, or you do certain things, like put like, you know, trinkets in your hair, they mean certain things, and they have certain implications. Kind of how, like, correct me if I'm wrong, and I think women who, like, wear, like, what is it called, a tika, like, they have to be married or something like that, right? So I said a tika, the bindi, oh my god, I'm getting so confused. I'm on like 6 pills of medication right now. I'm super sick and super flushed. But yeah, so like, if they wear the bindi, it means that, like, they're a married woman, or or wearing the sari too in like Indian or in Pakistani culture, because I know Bengalis.
I wasn't allowed to wear it until I got married.
And I think it's similar in Sudanese culture too. I'm not positive, but like, I don't think young girls wear the thobe until after they're married. I'm not positive though. So like, these different things, I went from hair to clothing, but sometimes just styling your hair has like certain meaning behind it. I know it's like a rite of passage. I remember the first time I like straightened my hair, it meant like I was an adult and I was a woman, and all of like my aunts and stuff like that, and like the aunts in the community, they were like, wow, Reem, you look like a woman now. And I'm like, thanks. I'm like 27. Okay, it wasn't 27.
Well, how did Minna feel? For those who don't know, so Minna is mixed.
Yeah.
So how did she feel when you because you straightened her hair?
Recently I straightened her hair. Oh my gosh, I really didn't want to do it. But she's been asking me because she has a cousin who gets her hair straightened, and close in age, like a few years older. And she just like, Mama, I want straight hair. Mama, I want smooth hair. Mama, I want to be pretty. And that's when I was like, stop there. I was like, first of all, you're my daughter, so you're never gonna have pretty hair.
No.
just real talk. Right, but no, it's a joke. No, I told her your hair is what you naturally have is the most beautiful. That's what Allah made us. That's how Allah made us. And so I talked to her about like being your natural self and your true self is what is most beautiful. But you can also like do other things for the fun of it. Yeah. Right. But I was like, if you think I'm gonna straighten your hair every day, no, this is like a once every 6 months thing. Like, don't. When she did it, she was super excited, and she was like, Mama, I'm always beautiful. Like, because I talked to her for like 20 minutes about how like embrace all the different forms of yourself. So she got super excited about it. She wanted me to do it again this week, and I was like, no, it's not happening.
We already did it.
No. So I did a different braiding style for her. Like usually I have like 2 to 4 braids in her hair. So I gave her like 8 braids or something like that. And so I was like, look at that. And she likes a lot of braids too, but she can't sit still for it because her older cousin, like also another cousin, who's like fully Sudanese basically, always has like really nice braids. So Minna was like, I look like Yasmina. That line is also in that poem. So
Christina said that's definitely my favorite.
Yeah. I'll be doing it today, and I'll explain why.
I'm excited for that.
Yeah.
So we've talked about poetry as a way of merging.
Oh my God, it's been 42 minutes.
I know, time passes quickly. Poetry as a way of merging yourself. But you also mentioned academia.
Yeah.
Why did you mention that?
How did I mention academia? Can you tell me?
You said that academia also as a vehicle of selfhood, spirituality, and politics.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So for me, academia is really important. I believe in the concept of... So my dad once told me... Okay, I went like off. So my dad once told me that every human being should be a teacher at one point in their life. And he truly believes this because if you teach another person, you really learn how to empathize, and you understand the struggles of a teacher or like a nurturer or like all these different, like it's a different set of role, like a different set of things that you need to do in a role you play. So when I became a teacher, like I realized that it fulfilled me in a way that like other thing, I like to talk. I'm a talkative person, so I'm like, let me talk to you guys.
Like
all day
perfect
long.
For digging deeper.
Perfect for me not stopping, right? But you know, academia, the research aspect and the teaching aspect, really like gives me an opportunity to answer these questions that like I just talk about all the time. But it gives me the opportunity to really look at who said this before, why does it happen, and look into a more detailed, like nuanced narrative of why it's happening. And so that's why I see it as a vehicle of activism. For me, for example, to sit and like talk about multiple identities with other people, they're like, whoa, that's so interesting. But for me to really understand multiple identities at a really, really deep level is important too. So I use academia and academics to kind of just like understand more deeply. I think through teaching, though, you see it in playing out. You see it in action. You see people struggling with these questions, and you talk to them about it. And when you talk, seeing a student have like this like mind-blowing moment, like that's the best feeling in the world. It's the best
feeling. It really is.
Yeah, it's the best feeling in the world. And you don't feel like it's you. Like, I don't feel like when my student has this like mind-blowing moment, I don't feel like, oh, like that I did that, right?
Yeah.
I feel like I'm so excited at their moment of self-discovery. Like, that's literally how I feel.
And that you're a part of that, or you're there to experience it with them, or witness it.
Yeah, that you witness it. That's such a good word. Like, that you're there to witness it, that you're there to, like, you know, see that, like, birth of life in them. Like, because their eyes literally light up. Like, you see that, and that is such a good feeling. And so for me, like, you see these themes play out in teaching, you see it play out in academic, like, research and stuff like that, and it fulfills me. Like, when I look at these questions and I try to answer them, it fulfills me in a way in a different way that poetry does, in a different way than like, you know, my activism does. But I'm an activist through my poetry. I'm an activist through my teaching, especially the last like 5 years. All of my activism is through teaching and poetry, like, because I haven't been a political organizer in a while.
I mean, that's the one thing too, is that to be an activist and to be a person with a spiritual expression, that looks so different for different people, right? Because what you are drawn to is going to be, what I'm drawn to is going to be different than what you are drawn to. And I think that's the beauty too of the academy and academia in general, is that people who, especially if you're going in for a master's and a PhD, the assumption is that you're going into this specialized area of research or the specialized topic because it means something to you.
You have to love it so much to get through that, like, torture.
I mean, to spend 7 years of your life just focusing on that one aspect. Gosh. It's got to be something that you really love, you really are drawn to. And you can tell, I mean, if you teach a subject that you are not drawn to, it comes off.
Yeah. That's so true. Like, it's such a dry, like, experience. When I tried to teach Arabic, I love Arabic. But when I actually tried to teach Arabic, I hated it so much. I was just like, why am I doing it? I quit in like 3 weeks. I just like, no, thank you. But when I teach history and religion and politics, like, all of those are 3 totally different domains. But I always end up tying them together in terms of identity. The history, the politics, like all of that stuff in religion, I tie it all back to identity because I care so much about this question. Yeah.
And it's a question that will come up forever.
Yeah, for the rest of my life. I know it's going to be there somewhere.
This constant thread. Look at Aubrey just sitting down here. Let's take a couple of comments. AJ said, "Oh, Minna, so sweet. Would you consider running for a local office? Maybe when your kids are a bit older."
No. Because we were talking about this earlier, not about like politics per se. I'm not a public person. I am to some extent. I'm a very open.
You say this on a public forum.
I know. I was saying this. So her little sister Noni was talking about how, like, you know, are you nervous? And I'm like, no, I'm not nervous. I just don't like being public. Like, I'm a private person. So I'll go to small open mics and perform. My activism was always behind the scenes. So I do, like, a lot of community organizing, but I would never be the speaker. I would never be, like, the face, right? Because I just feel so much more comfortable in the background and organizing in the background. I don't like being the face, right? And it makes me super uncomfortable when I have to be in front of people. And even when I'm teaching, like, every class, so there's like, so anyone who doesn't happen to be Muslim, right, there's like a prayer that people say before like doing something big, and that's like what Moses says, right? Like, which is like, open my heart and like loosen my tongue so it's like more comfortable and speaking and clear, right? So I say this every day I teach. Every session I say that. Every poem I perform, I say it before I perform in my brain, because it's not that I'm nervous, I just don't feel comfortable being in the public. I don't like people watching me, and it's happening right now.
I know, with this bright light. Well, I mean, what then motivates you, or motivated you in the past, and continues to motivate you to perform at open mics?
I feel like I'm going to borrow this word, and it's not my, like, it's a word that anyone can use, but I heard it the most from Zayn Shamoun, and he always talks about it being a catharsis, whatever, a cathartic experience, and it is. So when you perform a poem, like, so I talked about how you write it and you look at it and there's self-reflection. It really, like, you feel that, right? And the world feels it and the pages feel it. But when you release it from your heart into the world, especially if you have a good, like, vibe community, like, you're performing with, you literally feel like the world, like, has lifted the shoulder, like, the burdens from your shoulder, and you feel lighter. Like, it just feels like, like, literally that's how I feel. And that's probably why the way I perform normally is like spitfire, like, because I feel this huge amount of tension. And when I'm done that last line, I'm just like,
it's out.
It's out. It's like release. I feel that sense of release so much. Yeah.
And that's necessary. I mean, it's a beautiful part. I mean, Berhinda was on the show earlier in the season, and she talked about, you know, that writing a poem is like birthing a piece. Yeah. And so it's like birth. There's a release, right?
I definitely am familiar with that concept.
So I am not, but
I meant it. I forgot I had 2 kids. I meant it because I wrote a poem about birth. Remember?
Yeah,
the one
that's
about
also
freedom?
a piece that I really, really love.
Extended metaphor. Everyone thought I had like.
Oh, can you read that one on Friday too?
I can read it on Friday. Yeah.
So, if you guys don't know, I host open mics at Bottom Line Coffee House in Detroit, which is on 3rd Street, sort of near Forest. And the third Friday happens to be this coming Friday, which is 4/20, which is my birthday. So I'm having a special birthday edition open mic. It'll be 3 hours long. So definitely come out to that.
I'm going to have my baby with me too.
It's all good. If you're in town, come to it. Mully said, Rubazan. Mully said, you're right. Performing poetry is such a therapeutic and empowering experience.
It is.
And especially when you birth that piece or you share that piece and you're vulnerable with other people, and the people in that space, like you were talking about the vibe and what that space is like, if it's a safe space, they'll receive it and give you that positive affirmation, validation, positive responses.
Yeah, because I've definitely been to open mics where people are really about like seeming cool.
Yeah.
Or if it's like open mics are different than spoken word competitions or slams, right? Yeah. So I've been to a lot of slams, and slams, they're just like, it's really about like, you know, let me destroy the other person.
Who's got the best words.
Right? So it's about like, let me destroy the other person. So it can be really destabilizing for a person who wants to express themselves. Yeah. Whereas open mics are really about like nurturing that moment and letting it like come to fruition. And I think that is really like essential.
Yeah. And that helps with sort of merging the self, too. Because all those elements come together in that moment. She said, hey, birthday girl, dirty 30. Yes, dirty 30. Did I miss any? No, I didn't. One of the last things that you had mentioned when we discussed this is you talked about poetry and academia sort of as this vehicle, right, of selfhood. But you also talked about not being a bystander.
Oh, okay, yeah.
What did you mean by that?
So I believe that there's no such thing as a passive bystander. And this is a personal belief, right? That you can't really, like, if you see something happen and are just, like, watching it happen, people call it, like, a passive bystander. Yeah. But the reality is what you're doing is continuing to allow that thing to happen. So you're not really passive. You're actually you're looking at this moment and you're accepting it for what it is. And that is an active like pursuit, right? So say for example, like right, you see someone say like something super racist to someone right in front of you, okay? And like say the story is like, you know,
whatever happens and you don't do anything.
Yeah, like there's like one person I remember I was talking to, and they were like, if someone black moved into my street, I would move out.
Wow.
They straight out said that. And it was in front of me and my mom, okay? And obviously like my mom was like, oh my God, like what am I supposed to say? So in that moment she was like a passive bystander, okay? But like obviously like my mom's an older like immigrant woman who doesn't really have much to say. Like, oh no, she has a lot to say. I meant she doesn't have in that moment much to say. Like she's like, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. And so I would just like, hold up, you do know I'm married to like a black man, right? And that was my response. And I was just like, so can you please remove yourself from my presence? I literally said that. Wow. And I was like, I can be really, I'm really nice, but I can be really obnoxious if you really piss me off, right? And my mom was just like, she turns around and like grabs my shoulder, and I thought she was going to yell at me because, you know, she's like, respect your elders. Because this is obviously a woman who's older and Arab, right? But she was like, literally in the moment, Reem, I'm really proud of you in front of this lady.
Wow.
Yeah. And that was like ingrained into my consciousness because like in that moment, if my mom didn't say that to me, she would have been a passive bystander like 100%. And it would have been really hurtful because you're allowing that person to continue in their like racist like ideas. Yeah. But they're forcing those ideas on you, and they're pushing that narrative on you. Is that an act of pacifism? No, they're being actively aggressive. They're being an aggressor in that moment. And if you're passively bystanding, you're actually accepting their aggression. You're accepting and willing it to be okay. And so I believe that you can't be a passive bystander, because
you're constantly making that decision.
You're constantly accepting that this is okay. You can have moments where, like, I don't want to deal with this crap right now. Like, I understand that. Like, when people constantly ask me about Islam, and I'm just like, I don't want to deal. So, like, literally, whenever I come through customs and I get interrogated, right? Like, they ask me questions, and I'm like, you know what? I literally hand them my business card, and I'm like, how about you attend my lecture, like, this day to this day, like, this time to this time on this day and this day. This is especially when I wasn't teaching online. This is like, I'm teaching physically. And I'm like, because they're asking me about all these questions, like, about, like, my beliefs on, like Al-Qaeda and ISIS and whatever. And I'm just like, you know what?
Like, I'm trying to go home.
I'm trying to go home. If you want to ask me these questions, you'll hear what I have to say in my class. You're more than welcome to come. Right? And in that moment, like, I'm sick. I'm like, whatever. Like or people, or like people like, who parked their camel in the parking lot? Someone said that to me before, and I looked at the person and I was just like, you know that I understand what you just said, right? And you're dumb, right? But in that moment, I just can't, like, I'm just like, whatever. I don't feel like dealing with a long conversation right now. Like, let me just go sleep. Like, I don't want to deal with this. So I think that,
and when you're faced with those types of microaggressions and macroaggressions constantly, that can get really exhausting.
It's exhausting. So you have to do some self-care and just, like, ignore sometimes. But I'm saying, like, the major pivotal moments, like, you can't be a passive. Like, if you see, for example, you know, a cop beating down someone who's African American, you need to stop that. Like, you might get hurt yourself, but you can't be a passive bystander at that moment. Like, you can't.
Like, do what you can.
Do what you can. It could be like, stop, right? If you're too scared to go in, but you have to do something in that moment. Like, you can't be a passive bystander.
AJ said, "You're nice nasty." LOL.
Nice nasty. Yeah.
I mean, we have just like a couple minutes before you do your expression. But yeah, I think that is a very important point that you brought up. And I think that sometimes people get overwhelmed and they feel like to be an activist and to be someone who speaks out for the oppressed is like some huge daunting, like, you know, task. Yeah. But I think it comes down to smaller moments as well. And I think writing and being a poet and being a teacher, all of those are forms of activism for.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I'm not trying to be like Linda Sarsour or like, you know, Daria Mujahid. I'm trying to be me, but like, I don't want to be like a public person. I'm just gonna stop it there. Like, I'm gonna make sure that this aggression doesn't keep happening. But I'm not trying to be like a public face. And you don't have to be. To be an activist, you don't have to be. You can be active. You can be an activist through your medium. So if your medium is like drawing and like painting, like you can be an activist through your painting. Like, and I was thinking of that like when I saw Malika's painting today that was posted on Kun Fayakun, or Be and You Will Become. Or it has become, which is like what God says when he creates something. And I saw that and I'm like, it's not a political message, it's a spiritual one. But at the same time, you could look at that and really feel like, you know, kun fayakun, like the reality of what is happening is our reality. This is what God made. This is how it was made. And my role in kun fayakun, like, is up to me. So it's my role in what is happening and what God has done or created for us, or the situations we're in. That also is a part of God's plan. And so when you see something that's like a painting that says that, it could be both a political and a spiritual message for yourself. So it doesn't,
it's like a representation of that merger.
So you don't have to be like, you know, political through conventional means. And that's actually what I found during my like PhD dissertation, that like Muslim Americans can be political, but they're not going to do it through conventional means. So they do it through unconventional politics.
So you want to share a few pieces?
Yeah. Okay. I'll explain why I chose this one particular.
Okay.
So this poem, Christina both mentioned it, and Tazeen did.
I'm gonna get out of the view in this.
Oh, you can stay in the view. That's okay, because I have to be standing and moving when I perform, and so like I'm not gonna do that when I'm like I don't know how to do it when I'm sitting. So this poem, Braids, really like mixes all of these concepts together. I actually talk about selfhood in it. I talk about my identity in it. I talk about politics in it, and I talk about like relationships, like love. In the poem, like I was at like a spoken word like workshop at one point, and they told us to write a love poem, and it had to be non-conventional or what is it called? What's the word? Cliche, non-cliche. So this is the poem that I wrote, but really the reason why I wanted to do it here is because I feel like all of those selves that I've talked about kind of get merged into this poem.
Okay. Can you turn the water off?
She's like going at Nobody's hair. Okay. This morning, I sat cross-legged on the floor, my 3-year-old in front of me. The AC was blasting on the both of us. It was chilling, but I felt like I was melting. She sat there in whimpering silence, fearful of what would happen, fearful of me. She loves me, but fears me. We both made eye contact in the mirror, my hazel eyes piercing her coffee-colored ones, demanding, not another noise. Okay, and I usually smile like that too. I love her, but she drives me crazy. There is something about this ancient tradition of combing through your child's wild, wiry, thick curls that is timeless, boundless, and earth-shattering. There is something about this tradition that strengthens our bond while simultaneously breaking it. I pull and twist, she pulls and tugs away. I feel guilty for her pain, but this odd pleasure that she's under my control. That I have this moment to feel divine, and it's through recreating patterns of the world onto the encasing of her mind. Through recreating cornrows, French braids, ponytails, pigtails, or just by brushing through the knots. I love it. She hates it. I love her. She hates me. Her eyes are filled with tears as I braid her hair mudaffara, like it's divine scripture twisted into her scalp. I can see her future engraved into the strands more clearly than any soothsayer. Another tear escapes her eyes. Mama, ma bahibbik, ma daira dafrat. I wanted to ask her shu baddik, but she doesn't like it when I speak my dialect, so I asked her, daira shanu. We locked gazes. She goes back to ignoring me as another tear escapes, and I continue to braid her hair. I tell her, she has no choice, that her grandparents have entrusted their braiding culture upon me. I won't drop their legacy just because I'm an outsider. I will not let her abandon her history, her culture. I will not let her lose her ancestors, so I tie them. I tie them into her hair like they're strands of hope. I twist them in so she always has a rope to hold on to. I tell her, حيكون عندك ضفرات حلوة مثل ياسمينة, her older cousin who has the most intricate braids, her standard of beauty. So she nods, willing to take the pain. She doesn't realize that I have forgotten my whole culture. I've forgotten my whole culture, my ancestral language, my historical legacy. She doesn't realize that no one took the time to weave it into me. She doesn't realize that I easily gave up on myself because she preferred her father's culture over mine. She doesn't realize as long as they're both happy and don't piss me off, then it's not a big deal. She doesn't realize that if it's not made a part of you, then it could easily disappear. My history, my culture, my ancestral roots all collapse under the heavy weight of war. But for my baby, I want it to be a part of her in a way that it was never part of me. I learned from her ancestors the ancient legacy that comes with braiding, so I just sat cross-legged on the floor braiding her hair, intertwining parts of her soul into mine. Maybe that's why it hurts so much. Maybe that's why we both wanted to cry. Maybe, just maybe, that is why when I braid her hair, it feels like we're doing the work of the divine. Yeah. I need my glasses. That was really hard to read without my glasses. I was seeing double of everything.
You got tears in my eyes. That one, I love that one so much.
Yeah. I love it because like you saw, like it's like political, it's personal, it goes into like everything
and storytelling, the whole thing.
Yeah, so that's why I really wanted to do that.
The work of the divine.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want me to do the clouds one, or I'll do another one?
You can do another one.
Okay.
Do what you want to do.
I'll do this one. I probably performed both of these together that time too. The ones like Refuge. Okay. This is called In God. Molly's like the only one there. I'm like, hey, Molly, shout out. Okay. A'udhu billah, a'udhu billah, a'udhu billah. I seek refuge in God. It is something Muslims tend to say when they're stressed out about anything. It is usually followed with a from, and you fill in the blank. I seek refuge in God from the evils of Satan. That's the most common. Or I seek refuge in God from the evils of mankind. Or I seek refuge in God because there is no sanctuary except with God. And these are the mantras we repeat to ourselves when we're frustrated, annoyed, scared, or even happy, but worried we may become ungrateful. So we seek refuge in God from ingratitude. Get it? But this poem is about questions and answers. Questions I have been asked and answers I have yet to give. If I could tell you how many times I've been asked, where are you from throughout my life, then I'd have $0 because no one would give me a dime for each time, let alone a penny. As a person in my early 20s, I struggled so deeply with my Arab and American identity that I wrote a poem about it. You've probably heard me perform it here and there. I sound angry, unapologetic, and ready to burst. I got so frustrated with the question in my teenage years, I'd answer, I'm American, born and raised with my thickest Bostonian accent. I never identified as being Syrian. No, never Syrian. I hit my 20s, met Arabs here in Detroit, and realized, holy Swedish fish, I can be both Arab and American. Lo and behold, I wrote a poem about it, but still never Syrian. No, never Syrian. I don't know why. Maybe my parents never forced me to adopt their cultural identity. They never force-fed their cultural values down my throat. I knew it. I knew I was Halabiya from the way I ate zait and za'atar with cucumbers and tomatoes for breakfast every morning. I knew I was Halabiya from the way everyone called Syrian bread, but we just called it bread. I knew that I was Halabiya from the mixes of spices that filled the pantry and an overload of cumin and everything, but for some reason I never said it. People asked me, where are you from? And I was just American. Over the last 2 years, I've been comfortable with asking back, are you asking me where my parents are from, or my heritage, or my ethnic makeup, or any of the above? Usually people are offensively, although unintentionally, curious. I am Syrian. There. I said it. It took a civil war, over 470,000 people killed, and the destruction of my childhood memories for me to finally say it. I don't understand why it took me so long to feel it. Maybe it was the fact that I could see my history crumbling in front of me like the crumbling of the citadel of Aleppo, a history I never felt connected to, but suddenly it pulled me in with an invisible thread. Maybe it was the fact that the graves of my ancestors, the homes of my ancestors, and the history of the whole Middle East is centered there. Maybe it was something stupid like social media. I was finally talking to my cousins on Facebook. Maybe it was the war. But that question wasn't enough, nor did they realize how much I had already overcome to answer it. Are you a refugee? I hated the question. I hated the person's curiosity, and I hated my damned guilt. The guilt of not having pride for 29 years of my cultural history. The guilt of wanting to answer the question with an emphatic no, but doing so only perpetuates the myth that the refugees are a bad, unwanted group of people. The guilt of wanting to answer the question with a prideful yes, even though it isn't true, just to put the person in their place for not minding their own damn business. The guilt of not knowing what to do when asked such a question. The guilt of not knowing how to be Syrian because I'm second-generation American. The guilt that my child will never know about her ancestors because no one in the world gives a flying flip-flop about what can be done to stop the war. The guilt that my husband's family has jokingly offered me Sudanese citizenship because there's so many Syrian refugees there now and I could easily blend in. The guilt that I still haven't answered the question. It's hanging in the air, thick, musty, full of ignorant curiosity. Are you a refugee? People have been asking me if my family has been hurt, if they're okay. I hate that question more than all the others. No one is unscathed from a civil war. Every Syrian either has someone killed, missing, detained, displaced, seeking asylum, or an emigre. So my answer to that question is always the same. My situation is the same as all others. My family is the same as all others. And to answer the question earlier, are you a refugee? Yes, I am Syrian. But are you a refugee? I seek refuge in God because there is no sanctuary except with God. Yeah.
Well, two very powerful pieces that
Thank you.
perfectly intertwined everything that you were talking about.
That's why I picked them. I was like, I'll do the clouds one for Tazeen, but I was just like, it doesn't have any element of politics. It's all like personal. So I was just like, let me do something
these are
else.
perfect because they were personal and political at the same time.
And they're both about identity.
And both about identity.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Reem, so much for being on the show today. It was such an important topic, and I feel like it's a topic that we could delve even deeper in. You know, like there's so much more that you can talk about fragmentation of identity and how do you merge those those selves so that you have a sense of unity and unification in yourself. But yeah, thank you for being here. I really appreciate it.
Me.
Do you have anything that you want to, last minute thing that you want to share with the audience, or anything that you're doing or working on, or any just last words?
I think my hope is that people don't realize that they develop this sense of unity when they're older. It's really hard for young people. And so I'm hoping that if any young people are watching, that they can find that sense of unity in who they are earlier than they need to. Yeah. That they can find it sooner. And it's really easier than they would think. It really comes down to stop fighting against yourself. That's all it is. Just accept who you are and stop fighting against who you are.
I like that. Yeah. Stop fighting and just embrace it.
Yeah, embrace it. It doesn't mean that you don't have to change anything about yourself. You can work to better yourself in different elements, but embracing who you truly are. A lot of people, it takes a long time for them. Yeah. And the other thing is, you can check me out on my Instagram.
Yes, Reem's Instagram and all that stuff will be posted on my Instagram, on my Facebook, on the website, on the YouTube. The videos go up tomorrow, so you can share them as well. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. So that is it for episode 12. We only have 2 more episodes left in season 1. In season 1. Dang. So only 2 more episodes left. We've got one more next week, and the week after that, I'm gonna have a little surprise for the last episode that we do. So stay tuned and have a very blessed evening. Bye, y'all.